Well, good afternoon. This is Truth Seeker here, and I wanted to take some time to make a video here that I believe is an important one to make that has to do with creation. Since the invention of the telescope around the time of Galileo, humans began to see that the universe was larger than what we originally thought it had been. And we found and discovered that we weren't at the center of the universe, that the earth was not the center of the universe, that humankind was not the center of everything that God created. The Copernican theory showed that the earth revolved around the sun, and that the moon revolved around the earth, and that the moon was a sphere, and that it was pockmarked with many it wasn't a perfect smooth surface, but it had mountains and it had craters all over it. Jupiter was a planet that had moons that orbited it. So we began to peer into our solar system and realize that these moving stars were actually bodies not too different from the Earth. And through the 16th, 17th, and 19th centuries, our telescopes began to get larger and larger, and we could peer deeper and deeper into the universe. And we realized that we lived in a large galaxy we called the Milky Way that was made of millions upon millions of stars, which suggested that there were millions of other planets similar to Earth. And not only were there millions of planets, but that we weren't at the center of this universe, that we were somewhere outwards from that universe, that we were peering towards the bright center of the universe as we looked in toward the Milky Way, and that we were looking into the plane of that universe. And our understanding of the universe began to grow. But we didn't realize that the universe was much larger than our own galaxy, the Milky Way, until well past the 20th century. In 1925, Edwin Hubble pointed his telescope at Mount Palomar, the largest telescope in the world at the time, at a fuzzy spot in the sky they used to call nebula, and what they had thought was a nebula. And it turned out to be a spiral galaxy they named Andromeda. And that galaxy had millions upon millions of stars like our own galaxy. And with that it's a revolution in understanding of the universe. It was very shortly afterwards that hundreds and hundreds of these other galaxies began to be understood to exist, that many of the nebula that we saw were not just gaseous spots in the sky, but that these were galaxies in their own right that that contained billions of stars. And so we began to realize that our place in the universe was much smaller than we had originally ever thought. And not only were there many other galaxies, but it appeared that no matter where we looked in the sky, every single galaxy was moving away from us. And the reason they knew this was as a result of Einstein's theory of relativity. Einstein in 1905 proposed a revolutionary understanding of our universe, both the special theory of relativity and then in 1915 the general theory of relativity. And with this concept, with this understanding of relativity, we began to see that nothing could exceed the speed of light. Only energy could attain the speed of light in the universe, but matter itself could never exceed the speed of light. And we also realized that there was no absolute reference point, that there was no what we call center to the universe, that every reference point was equivalent to every other reference point. And that revolutionized our understanding of the universe. And what we realized was that as we looked at these galaxies, we saw that they were all redshifted from us. And what this means was that even though we measured the light coming from these galaxies at us being the speed of light, which is 3 by 10 to the 8 meters per second, but you see, this is something that's not intuitive to us human beings. If we're on the New Jersey Turnpike and we're going 70 miles an hour in the north direction, and somebody is going 70 miles an hour in the south direction, our relative speeds we would measure to be 140 miles an hour with respect to one another. But with Einstein's theory of relativity, if we were shining flashlights and we were in spaceships and going towards each other on the intergalactic Jersey Turnpike, and we were shining lights at each other, we wouldn't see a difference in the measurement of the speed of light. We would not see twice the speed of light. What we would see instead is a shift to the blue or more energetic wavelength. We would still measure light to be the same speed of light, 3 by 10 to the 8th meters per second, but we would see that light shifted in wavelength to a more energetic wavelength. If we were moving apart from one another, we would see that light redshifted, even though that light was still moving at the same speed relative to one another. We would see that light redshifted in its frequency. And that's what we observed with all of the galaxies in the universe, that they were redshifted, that no matter where we peered in the sky, it was redshifted. And the further and deeper we looked into space, the more redshifted we found the frequencies to be than for the closer objects, which means that in the outer reaches of space, the galaxies were flying apart at a much faster rate of speed away from us than the galaxies that were relatively close to us. And so this was a very important aspect, because what this implied was, if everything is moving away, if space is expanding at this huge rate of speed, and it's carrying all of the matter with it, all of these galaxies with it, then if we ran the clock backwards, this means that at one point in time, all of matter, everything that we saw in space, must have been condensed at one point in time. And we called that theory the Big Bang theory today, because we believe that at one point in time, everything that is in the universe that we've seen was condensed into one point. And in fact, the laws of physics, in terms of what we think of in time and space and energy, all break down at that point, and just things came to be, and moved outward, and the energy from that outward inflation of a massive amount of energy began to coalesce into different different things, into different particles, some into hydrogen atoms, and the four forces of nature, the electromagnetic force, the strong force, and the weak force, and gravitation, all came to be, as well as spatial dimensions, which can move outward at a greater rate than even the speed of light, because space is just a dimension. It's not limited in its rate at which it can expand. And so, at first, scientists began to deride this concept back in the 30s, and I think it was an astronomer by the name of Hoyle who derided the concept that everything may have had a singular beginning. In fact, that actually the idea is that everything was condensed into what we call a singularity, a single point. He derided that with the idea of a large explosion, and he called it the Big Bang. Well, the name stuck, and it no longer is derisive to call it the Big Bang, and that's what we believe today occurred, that everything originated from this singular event that created this entire universe, and that some period of time after the universe expanded to a certain point, the universe began to cool down because the energy density also began to decrease because space was increasing in size. And back in 1965, a pair of scientists from Bell Laboratories, Arno Penzias and Robert Wilson, and here's a photograph of them and the device that they used. I've seen that. In fact, I actually met Arno Penzias. He was still working for Bell Labs when I worked for them, and I met him a couple of times. Very fortunate. It's not often you get to meet a Nobel Prize winner. But they were working on trying to eliminate background noise, similar to the snow that you get on television sets, the old rabbit ear television sets. And what it turned out to be, that they discovered that this noise interference that they couldn't seem to clear away was the cosmic background radiation from the Big Bang. And so here they had hard evidence that was absolute proof that the Big Bang was a correct theory, and they won the Nobel Prize for their work. Now, the reason they had done this, they had found that there's throughout the universe a cosmic background radiation called we call it the cosmic background radiation of 3 degrees Kelvin. And this had been predicted that given the rate of expansion that the universe was observed to be moving in, that given the amount of space that we observe and how much energy that we estimate existed in the Big Bang, that the cosmic background radiation would be 3 degrees Kelvin, and they did indeed confirm this, the presence of this this omnipresent cosmic background radiation. And so that was our first very strong and hard evidence, besides the fact that all galaxies were moving away from us, that the universe had its beginning in a singularity. So this was a critical element of our understanding of how the cosmos came to be, is the confirming of the cosmic background radiation, the 3 degrees Kelvin. In fact, Bell Labs used to sell T-shirts that said 3 degrees K in their company store. I wish I had that now because Bell Labs is out of business, and that is a unique, one-of-a-kind T-shirt. Anyway, Robert Wilson is still alive. I believe Arno Penzias has since passed away. He was the older of the two. But scientists realize now that the deeper and deeper that we looked into space, the further back into time we were looking. And the furthest that we could look back is the background, cosmic background radiation. And we call that the limit of our observable universe. And we found that to be 13.8 billion years ago. And the reason we know these things is that we began putting up into orbit better and better instruments for mapping the cosmic background radiation, for mapping our universe, and looking deeper and deeper into the universe. With the Hubble telescope. The Hubble telescope further confirmed our understanding of the universe, so that we began to find more and more of the universe that was predicted, that black holes and quasars were seen for the first time and confirmed to exist. And so as we peer into the universe with our instruments, we know that we have our theories and our understanding of the universe have been further and further confirmed. And this is important because Einstein's theory of relativity is absolutely critical in understanding the behavior of our universe and the understanding of how our universe operates and actually began. And there are two key aspects of relativity that need to be understood. And I mentioned them earlier. One is that nothing can exceed the speed of light in the universe and the speed of light in a vacuum. So only light can attain the speed of light, which is 3 by 10 to the 8th meters per second. And that there is no absolute reference frame. The ancients used to believe that the Earth was the center of the universe. And then Copernicus used to believe the sun was the center of our universe. And now we understand that there is no center to our universe, that all reference points are equivalent, that there is no preferential reference point. So if you're in a spaceship traveling through the universe, going in one direction, it doesn't have a preference. It's not a preferential reference point than any other object in the universe that's moving through the universe. And so these are very, very important aspects, because when we look at the universe, one of the things that people want to know is, how big is the universe? Well, we know that the furthest back that we can see is 13.8 billion light years, or in other words, the distance that light travels in 13.8 billion years. So the universe is 13.8 billion years old, and we can't see beyond that point because anything that exists beyond 13.8 billion years is beyond our ability to see. But we also know that the universe has continued to expand. So light that emitted 13.8 billion years ago and took that long to get to us is now much further away from us than it originally was when it was 13.8 billion light years away. And we're just beginning to see that light now. In fact, astronomers have calculated that with the expansion rate of the universe, that even though we can't see beyond 13.8 billion light years, that the universe must be much larger. And some have calculated that our universe, um, what we call our observable universe, is some 46 billion light years in radius. And so this is our universe. It's some 92 or 93 billion light years in diameter, um, with taking Earth as sort of a sphere. But again, since there's no preferential point in the universe, wherever you look in the universe, it's going to look the same. That you can only see 13.8 billion light years away, and that the universe, its expansive universe, would also be 46 billion light years in radius, the same as we would observe. And what that means is that we can have, no matter where we are in the universe, we can have points, our observable universes, are spheres that overlap no matter where we are. There is no preferential. Now, in this presentation of the dark universe, they presented something similar to this little graphic that I created here, except they used better graphics and spheres and stars with the backdrop. But you get the idea that if the green circle that you see at the very top with its center, and that's that's us, and that's our galaxy, and we're peering out into the universe and looking into the 2 trillion galaxies that make up our observable universe. We may pick another point in our observable universe, and it has its own sphere of observable universe. It's not preferential. It doesn't end at our boundary. It has its own boundary that is equivalent to our boundary. And so you have these overlapping observable universes no matter where you exist, no matter where you are. So that you can see that there may be universes or aspects of our universe that are outside of our ability to see, that exist and have their own observable universe. In other words, this shows us that our understanding of the universe is much bigger now than it ever was. In fact, scientists believe that it's infinite because of this fact, and the fact that also, as far as they can tell, the universe is flat and that there's no curvature to space that would bring a limit to the universe. So, like Columbus sailing around the Earth, he would go due west and come back to exactly the same point he started from if he traveled due west long enough. So there is no end to our universe. There is no limit to our universe. Our universe is infinite in extent, and that has huge, huge, huge implications that transcend anything that the Bible could have ever anticipated. And on top of that, we're beginning to find that the universe has components to it that we never understood before. And that this is a tremendously exciting time to be in cosmology and physics, to look at some of the things that have never been understood before that are now being understood. For example, that we never, until the Hubble telescope was put into orbit, understood that there was something called dark matter, and that dark matter comprises the majority of matter in our universe. And that we found this through looking at galaxy clusters like the one that you see here. Galaxy clusters orbit like a solar system, the center of gravity between all of the galaxies. Everything in the universe is in motion in relationship to one another. And these galaxies are moving so quickly in orbit around the center of mass between them that something is holding them together. And that something is matter that we can't see. We call it dark matter. We don't know exactly what it is, but if it wasn't there, these galaxies would fly apart and they wouldn't orbit one another anymore because they're just orbiting too quickly for their masses, the masses accountable for the stars within the galaxies alone to hold them together. So there's another glue holding them together we call dark matter, and there's a gravitational pull that's keeping these galaxies together. And so that's something that we understand now about our universe that we didn't understand 15 years ago. And also, on the other hand, we have dark energy, which which has its effect on the rate of expansion of the universe. That we know that the rate of expansion, we once thought the rate of expansion of the universe was constant, but we now know that about 4 or 5 billion years ago, that the universe began to accelerate. And for there to be an acceleration in the expansion of the universe, then there has to be a force behind it. But we don't know what that force is. It works opposite to gravity, and it's causing masses and matter and the universe to expand at a ever increasing rate of speed. And it appears that due to Einstein's relativity theory, that E equals mc squared, that much of this energy was converted from the dark matter, that the dark matter was involved in being converted into energy, which then caused the acceleration of the universe. Right now, I believe that they estimate that 30% of our universe, observable matter, or observable universe, 30% of it is dark matter. And that 70% is dark energy. And so we've got these wonderful things that we know about the universe that all go back to an understanding that is far different from what was proposed and what was mentioned in the scriptures. The fact that the universe is infinite in its extent, and that there may even be other universes. There are theories that postulate the presence and the existence of other universes, parallel universes that may overlap one another, and some may interact. Others may never interact with our universe. So we are beginning to expand our understanding of what actually is and what we call our universe is far, far greater than what ever could have been conceived of during the days of the writing of the Bible. Now, this is where we're going to pick up on the Bible with this little backdrop of cosmology and some of the basics of our understanding of how the universe came to be and some of the things that we know about the universe today. And take a look at the scriptures themselves and what they say about the creation and the creative process. Because again, as I mentioned at the very beginning of this video, Genesis, without this critical basis, this is the foundation of all the doctrinal teachings of Watchtower. And does Watchtower, is it honest? Is it giving an honest portrayal, or is it omitting and deceiving its members? And I believe that it can't help but be deceiving its members with the misinformation that they provide in their interpretation of Genesis, just by looking at Genesis itself, and not only looking at the universe, and which has very, very strong implications, because when you look at the aspect of the universe being infinite, means that the probability of other beings like us inhabiting other planets has to be 1 or 100%. There is no question about it that there are other intelligent beings living on other planets and other parts of our universe and outside of our universe, that outside of our observable universe, that have high intellects, that have may be like us, may not be like us, may be entirely different. But the universe being infinite means that this has to be. And so the Bible is very human centric. In other words, it was devised with humankind as being the pinnacle of God's creation, and the only goal, the penultimate goal of God in his creative process was the creation of man. And this is what Watchtower teaches. And so humankind's fall in the creative account, the creation account, is critical to their doctrinal understanding of salvation and the necessity of Jesus coming to save humankind, offering himself a ransom sacrifice, everything that they believe about God and Jesus and his sending his son to save the world, and doing so in a 1,000-year kingdom that Jesus is going to set up. All of that hinges upon the validity of the creation account in the Bible. And if that isn't correct, if Genesis is not correct, then none of it can be correct. And we know Genesis can't be correct, because if we say that, as the Watchtower promotes, as the Bible students teach, that the whole purpose of God is to magnify his principles and his teachings, his truth, then Jesus would have had to die infinitely, an infinite number of times, because there have to be an infinite number of like intelligent beings on other planets. It has to be, because the fact that the universe is infinite in its extent mandates the fact that there are other intelligent beings, and not only just other, but an infinite number. And that means Jesus then would have to have died continually on the cross over and over and over and over and over again for all of these other creations, because God's principles are unswerving. They do not change. They're unchangeable. So every single intelligent creation, according to the Bible, according to Jehovah's Witness doctrine, according to the Bible students, would have to experience sin and evil in order to understand the lessons that God is trying to teach his intelligent material beings. And And if it's this way here, it has to be this way everywhere. And so Jesus must be dying continually on the cross for all of these other civilizations, all these other creations. And we know that can't be. That just doesn't make sense. That would not be an omniscient, all wise God if that were the case. And so we know that just from that fact alone, that the Bible can't be true, that we aren't the only creation that exists in this vast, vast, vast universe, incomprehensibly vast universe. Andromeda alone has 1 trillion stars, and we say that there are 2 trillion galaxies within our observable universe, and that our observable universe overlaps infinitely with all these other universes. We cannot be the only creations in the infinite realm of the universe. But besides that, looking more closely at the creative days, let's take a look at what Watchtower teaches and show that it is being deceptive via omission of information, and they're making their followers have to accept what they say without question, without evidence, without proof, and without substantiating what they claim. They just say, accept what we teach you. But if you look and just scratch just the short way below the surface of what Watchtower teaches, you will see absolutely that they are deliberately omitting, and presenting information in a devious way, in a way that is deceptive, and they can't be but knowing and willing deception. So let's take a look at this. In an article that I pulled down from the Watchtower, jw.org, called Are Jehovah's Witnesses Creationists? And they claim no. And they claim no on the basis of the fact that they seem to promote, they claim to promote what science accepts and has been saying about the age of our universe. And here they indicate that geologists estimate that the Earth is 4 billion years old, and astronomers calculate that the universe is as much as 15 billion years old. Now, this appears to be somewhat of a change from recent years because, like I said earlier, the articles that I read indicated many thousands of years rather than billions, but now it seems that they're trying to promote themselves as being more scientific and more correct than fundamentalists. They're trying to separate themselves from the fundamentalist, evangelist Christians that promote the idea that the Earth is only 6,000 years old, and that the creative days were only 24 hours long. But the thing is that they are creationists because Watchtower believes and promotes the idea that God was behind the creation, that he was the individual that was behind the act of creating all of the universe. So they are creationists. They are wrong when they deny being creationists, because they do believe that the earth was created, that the universe was created. How it was created, they're trying to align themselves with a little bit more of a scientific outward look, a veneer of being in harmony with science, but that's not true. Because when they take a look at the individual creative days, what they teach is not supported at all by science. And interestingly enough, throughout these articles, they never make any kind of a reference to the source where their information came from. They just throw out these generalities. Geologists estimate and astronomers calculate, but they don't provide any of the specifics as to where any of this information came from or how we came to this understanding. And they do this throughout the creative days, and they toss out their own arbitrary interpretations as if it is supported by a scientific understanding, which it is not. And so let's take a look at what they teach with regard to the creative days. First, they seem to separate the creative process, the statement that in the beginning God made the heavens and the earth. They seem to separate that from the first creative day. I'm not so certain as to why they would do that, because that seems to be a part of the creative act of God. At least in the way Genesis portrays the creative acts, God did something, and that something resulted from nothing, an apparent nothing, or an assumed nothing, to something, which is the heavens and the earth. So something happened, and for some reason they separate that happening from the work of the first day. Watchtower indicates that the work of the first day was the creation of light. And it says, in the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth was without form and void, and darkness was on the face of the deep, and the and the Spirit of God moved upon the face of the waters, and God said, "Let there be light," and there was light, and God separated the light from the darkness, and He called the darkness day, and the light day, and the darkness night. And with this, they assume that this was the creation of the sun. Now, this is not what the Bible indicates. And when we get to the fourth creative day, we'll take a look at that in particular. But Watchtower promotes that the work of the first day, the earth was already in process, it was already in existence, and that the sun came into being. And so they talk about the first day being the work of creating light, which was the sun, and they called it a diffuse light. Now, there's no reason for them to assume that the light that shined upon the earth from the sun. We know that in the formation of our solar system, that the sun formed first. It's about 5 billion years old, and it came into being just before the planets. And when the sun came into existence, then the inner planets made of denser material, like the Earth and Venus and Mercury and Mars, they were stony materials that formed an accretion ring around the sun that began to gravitationally come together and form the planets. And that's a simplistic description of the process, but that's how the inner planets were made. There were at some point there may have been as many as 20 smaller planets, Mars-sized planets that came together. In fact, that's one theory for the creation of the moon, was a Mars-sized planet collided with the Earth and ejected a mass around the Earth and caused the creation of the moon. None of that is described in Genesis in detail. The Earth, the moon, and the stars and the sun or the sun, the moon, and the stars are all talked about in the fourth creative day. So Watchtower takes some liberty here in the first creative day in assuming A, that the sun was created, um, and uh, and uh, and B, that there was only diffuse light that penetrated the Earth's atmosphere. They assume here that the Earth even had an atmosphere. Uh, there may have been a time when the Earth did not have an atmosphere, and that there were chemical reactions that came to be that formed an atmosphere later. So they're making some assumptions here that don't uh, uh, parallel or agree with the scientific understanding of how the Earth was made. Then they talk about the second day and that 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 they created a separation of the waters, that there was a cloud cover and that there was an ocean, and that the atmosphere was created at this point. Well, if there was no atmosphere beforehand, there would be nothing to really diffuse the light. So they're not really thinking too deeply when they propose what occurred and the sequence of things that occurred. Uh, Only when an atmosphere exists can there be a diffusion of light. Otherwise, the light would be like the moon. There would be absolutely nothing blocking the light from getting to the Earth's surface. So what they teach here doesn't coordinate well with anything that we would understand scientifically about the creation of the Earth. Now, in the third creative day, there are some interesting things here that Watchtower can't sidestep. And the third creative day, um, there are a couple of things that happen here, several things that happen. First, there's a gathering of what they call the gathering of the seas, and so that dry land would appear. And so there is a separation of land from water, from the seas, and that allowed plants to grow. And that was the purpose of this third day, according to the writers of Genesis, that the third day God created vegetation, and says fruit bearing trees that after its kind. And so there were grasses and trees, fruit bearing trees. And they don't understand that the first trees that were made were not fruit bearing. Fruit bearing trees are something that are relatively new in the uh, create what we understand to be the creative periods of the earth. We have what we call the Cretaceous period, which is the last era of the dinosaurs. There was the Triassic, Jurassic, and Cretaceous periods, and it wasn't until the Cretaceous period, the last period of the dinosaurs, between 150 to 65 million years ago, that fruiting trees came to appear. So right off, we can see that Genesis is incorrect. However, the archaeologists, paleontologists, I mean, um, uh, I'm sorry, I didn't mean archaeologists. I meant paleontologists are very clear about what they've discovered in terms of fruiting trees. And up until that point in time, trees did not bear fruit as we see them today. Um, there's another aspect of the third day that we'll take a look at, which plays an important role in what Watchtower teaches, in showing that Watchtower is not being honest about what it teaches on the creative days. And that has to do with the gathering of the lands. And it says here that that the lands were gathered together, and that's important because that's quite different from the other creative days in which the words used to describe the activities are to make or create. God made or God created. But in the third day, he didn't have to make dry ground. He gathered the waters, and what was already there came to appear. And so dry land was not made like other things, but was the constituents were there, and God just moved the water in such a way that the land now could be appeared or seen. And that word there used is roah, or to see, and that was used for the word to gather up the dry land. It means to see visibly. And that really is important because this would be the word that God would use according to Watchtower's interpretation of the fourth creative day, if indeed God had already made the sun and the moon and the stars. Which now brings us to the fourth creative day, which Watchtower explains here. The sun and moon become discernible from the earth's surface. Now, what they mean by that is they elaborate in a little more detail in the article, in another article, that the atmosphere was in a process of clearing, and that the sun and the moon and the stars were already in existence, but that they were now, they could appear from the surface of the earth. Well, that really doesn't matter. That would not be a significant thing if there was nothing on the surface of the earth to see the sun and the moon and the stars. In other words, it's a moot point. It really doesn't mean, it's a meaningless statement. I mean, if God is the only one that could see the sun and the moon and the stars from the surface of the earth, then it's meaningless. And we know that according to Genesis, animals weren't created until the fifth and sixth day, and man or humankind was not made until the sixth day. And so there wasn't anybody here to see the sun and the moon and the stars. So what difference does it make that they suddenly could be appeared? Plant life apparently did well enough with what light was around on the fourth or third creative day, so it wasn't an impactful event on plant life, and plant life isn't sentient anyway. Only animal life, and there are sentient animals. Would this be a significant event if this was what it meant? But really, that is making a claim about the creative day and what took place on that creative day that is not what is stated. What is stated is that the sun and the moon and the stars were made. And we'll elaborate on that a little bit later, but the word there is asa, and it meant to make, and it did not mean to see. And we'll take a look at that in a little bit more detail in a couple of minutes. Now, on the fifth creative day, they talk about God creating underwater creatures, great sea monsters, and and flying creatures, and they talk about insects, and that isn't really what this was talking about. When you think of a flying creature, you're not thinking necessarily of mosquitoes and flies and bees, but you're thinking in terms of birds, and that's what really the ancients were thinking about, what they were familiar with, because birds were the most significant flying creatures in our era. the era in which humans lived. And so that's what they were writing about. They didn't know anything about pteranodons and other flying lizards during the Jurassic and Cretaceous periods, but they were very familiar with birds, and they thought of birds as being a lower order than animals on the ground. So they were thinking in terms of a hierarchy of existence, where fish, the predominant creatures in the sea, and in fact, the ancients thought of cetaceans and whales as being analogous to fish, or if not, being fish themselves, and of a lower order. And they thought of birds as of a lower order than mammals and creeping animals, let's say, the creeping things on the earth, the horses and zebras and cattle and bovine creatures and so on, herding animals. They seem to be of a higher order, and they're describing creation in what ancients understood to be a hierarchy of sophistication, with humankind being the penultimate goal of God in his increasing order, complexity of creation. And they got it wrong. I mean, they just simply got it wrong. I mean, birds are directly descended from dinosaurs. They came to be largely in the Cretaceous period, although birds first began to appear in the Jurassic period. But they really didn't come into being until the Cretaceous period, and then post-Cretaceous period. And mammals themselves began in the Cretaceous period also, when and some may have even existed during the Jurassic period, but they were small animals that hid under rocks and rodent-sized type creatures. They were not large creatures, and they did not dominate until after the dinosaurs were wiped off the face of the earth by whatever reason. It could have been either some catastrophic event, something like a meteor, or it could have been a combination where there was a combined pathogen epidemic of some sort that took place with a catastrophic event like a meteor and volcanoes. There was the Deccan event where there was a large supervolcano in India that took place around 65 million years ago, and they think that, in conjunction with other things, may have been the reason for the great extinction that took place, the dinosaur extinction. And we're talking paleontologists, and the majority of paleontologists, when we talk about this extinction event. But and then, of course, Genesis says that man was created in the sixth day, and that was God's masterpiece. According to Watchtower here, if you read this, it says the sixth day culminates with a masterpiece of God's physical creation, the first human couple. And that's not what that's traditional religious ideas that humankind is the center of the universe. This is still archaic thinking, to think that humankind is it. When we understand that the universe is infinite in its extent, if not infinite, at least nearly infinite, we know that there have to be other creations like us. And when I say creations, not created by God, but they came about through natural processes like we did through evolutionary processes. So if it takes place here on the planet Earth, I don't see why evolution couldn't be a process that takes place in other parts of the universe. It seems that if the laws of physics are the same throughout the universe, then why not the advancement of life? So we've seen that Genesis itself is incorrect, just plain old incorrect in its presentation of creation and how life came to be on the planet, how the universe came to be, and how life came to be on this planet. And if God were the author of this book, he would get that right. This is a very simplistic thing. He could have an overview that of creation and presented in an overview of creation that would have been absolutely 100% correct and contained it in the same extent of detail as he did in Genesis, but as is presented in Genesis. But God didn't get it right. What we find is completely different from what is being promoted here by Watchtower. But you might just say, well, we forgive Watchtower. They honestly are deluded. They honestly are believe what they teach. It's just a misunderstanding, like all other Christians, accepting the word of God at face value, or what they interpret to be face value. And it really is more of an honest mistake on their part, because they really don't understand science, even though they do on the surface try to appear or give the appearance that they are more scientific in their approach, and by trying to dissociate themselves from the idea or concept of being creationists, by giving an interpretation of what a creationist is, and by giving what they think is a reasonable interpretation of the creative days. Although, if you follow those creative days closely and what they say, we know through paleontology that they are not correct. And if God were the one behind it, he should get creation correct. After all, that's what it's all about. God made everything, and there was a purpose to everything that he made. So why would God get the most critical thing wrong? The description of why, and how he made things, and the purpose of why. And so it doesn't make sense. It just doesn't make sense. But you can still forgive Watchtower and place them among all the other religions that misunderstand Genesis and misunderstand creation and science altogether. However, when you dig into the words, and Watchtower prides itself for being an organization that's scholarly, that digs into the details. They use experts. They try to promote themselves as being the taking care for towards providing accurate detail and so on. So when we dig into Genesis a little bit, not even much, we find that Watchtower certainly was not being honest, and they couldn't be. They had to overlook. They had to omit this understanding, the correct understanding of what Genesis was trying to say, because it would undermine everything that they teach. And this is where I'm going to with this. This is where the details make a real difference when we dig into the details of the creative account. Now, when you go through the first chapter of Genesis, which is the chapter that exclusively discusses the creative process of earth, there are two words that are used in the Hebrew that are used for the action of making or creating, and they are bara. I think that's Strong's 1254. If you go into Strong's Concordance, it's 1254 is the number. And Asa, Asah. I think they're pronounced bara and Asa. And Asa is 6213. Now, these two words are used over and over again in the creative days for the word to make. It's the active word. It means that before there was nothing beforehand and then something came to be. And this is important because these two words are used over again, and they're used interchangeably. For example, bara is used in the first in the first five verses, where it says, "In the beginning, God made the heavens and the earth," and that word bara means to shape or create, and asa means to make or do. And they are both used as active words in the process of making something. In other words, causing something that was not in existence to come into existence. And so bara is used in chapter 1, verse 1 through 5, where it says, "In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth." Also in 121, where he talks about making the birds and the sea creatures. And 126, where he says, God made man in God's image, or let us make man in God's image. That is in the sixth creative day. So throughout Genesis, the word bara is used. In 127, it says he made them male and female. So he talked about making Adam and Eve or causing them to come to be into existence, or in other words, creating them. Asa is also used in that same context throughout Genesis. In the second day, it talks about making the firmament. In the sixth verse, Asa, God made fruit yielding trees in day 3. In verse 11, that's Asa. And verse 12, for yielding seed and fruit. And Asa was used in the fourth creative day when it says that he made two lights, one to rule the day and one to rule the night. And that word is Asa. And this is important because in every context that these two words are used, it's in the context of causing something that did not exist to come into existence. Asa is used in making creeping things and livestock in verse 25, and in verse 25 when he made Adam or man in the sixth creative day. In verse 25, Asa is used. So Asa and bara are both used in the creation of man. And then in verse 30, which ends the chapter, it sums up everything. And it says that God looked at everything that he made and saw that it was good. And that word asa is there, everything that he made. So that includes and that covers all everything that he created. And that covers the word, those things that were described by the word bara and asa. And so it's clear that the word asa means to make or to create, and that it doesn't mean anything else. and bara means the same thing. So going back to the fourth creative day, we can't interpret the God making the sun and the moon as and explain it as simply they're coming into appearance from the surface of the earth. Like I said, there was nobody there on the earth for this to impact. There were no animals. There were no. The only thing described that were alive at that time would be plant life, and they seemed to be doing well in the third day before the sun and the moon and the stars were made. And that word means make. It can't. You can't interpret it any other way. God made the sun, the moon, and the stars on the fourth day. You see, this is because the ancients didn't understand science. They didn't understand the order in which things were created and the significance of the order that things were made. And if if Watchtower were correct, there is a word that could have been and should have been used if the sun and the moon and the stars suddenly were visible from the surface of the earth. That word would have been roa, which was used in the third creative day when the dry land became visible. And so roa should have been used if that was the case with the sun and the moon and the stars. That roa should have been used if this atmosphere, like Watchtower says, cleared up enough for them to see the sun and the moon and the stars. But roa was not used. Asa was used, and it was because they thought, the ancients who wrote this thought, the primitives who wrote this thought that the sun and the moon and the stars were made at that time on the fourth creative day, and you cannot get around it. So they had this miscomprehension that certainly isn't scientifically supported, and it's not explained away by Watchtower. Watchtower has to know the problem they have with this word asa. So Watchtower leadership and writers and whoever has has come up with their doctrinal beliefs should hang their heads in shame, like Adam and Eve here is depicted, for being deliberately dishonest with these words, with the presentation of what happened, what occurred on the fourth creative day, because they know darn well that that word didn't mean to make visible. There is a word for to be made visible or to be seen, and that's roa, and roa was not used. Asa was used, and asa in every single context meant in to make or to create, and that meant to bring something into being that did not exist beforehand, before the action was taken. So Watchtower has to know that they're being dishonest with this teaching, and it's not just Watchtower. The Bible students also present this same idea. It came from Russell, and Russell got this from an obscure geologist from the 1890s by the name of Isaac Vail, who was a Quaker geologist who was a school teacher and wrote a pamphlet about what he thought took place in creation. But it wasn't a scientific paper. It was never peer reviewed. It was never accepted. It was never tested as a theory. It was never accepted. And yet, Russell dishonestly used it in the photodrama of creation, used the veil theory as the absolute means by which the earth was created. So, right from the outset, Watchtower has been dishonest about this word asa on the fourth creative day. It is problematic for them, and rightly so, because their entire doctrinal system falls completely apart. because if you can't trust them in the creative days, and we know we can't trust the creative days, we know from a scientific perspective that the creation account is wrong, then everything that's associated with the creation account is wrong. But Watchtower is not only wrong about accepting the biblical account of creation, but also in being deceptive about omitting their understanding of that word asa in the fourth creative day by deliberately stating that, misstating what it means, what the word asa means, by saying that it means to obscure or to that the atmosphere was cloudy and hazy. That word only meant in that context to make and to create. And it's all summed up in the 30th verse where it says, God saw everything that he made, asa, and saw that it was good. And so now we get into this part of creation. This whole account is incorrect. And so if we can't accept this part of creation, how can we accept anything else? And we know from a scientific point of view that the human race did not come from two individuals. That is just not supported. We have the ability to look at genetics from from varieties of peoples from all over the world, and we understand that humans did not originate from two individuals from whom sin was inherited. So the entire doctrinal belief system of the Watchtower completely falls to pieces because we cannot accept the creative account. And we know that they're being deceptive and deceptively wrong about the creative account because they know the implications of being wrong. They know that if Genesis is incorrect about what it presents in the creation, then it's incorrect in what it presents about human creation also, because humans are a part of that creation. And according to Watchtower, the pinnacle of God's creative acts, which we know can't be, because this universe is so huge. So here we know that despite Watchtower's poor attempt, inept attempt at trying to give a veneer, a sort of a covering, a clothing of themselves as being more scientific, they're even more deceptive and worse than their creationist foes who believe the the um, the Bible in a literal sense with 24-hour days, creative days. At least they're taking the Bible in its literal sense and holding to it, even though they're completely wrong. They do believe the order of creation, and they're accepting Genesis at its face value. Watchtower is not accepting Genesis at its face value and is being deceptive about some key aspects of that creative description. So, so given all of this information, we just have to revisit Watchtower's motives in all of this because, for 140 years they have been promoting a having the truth, that they are the truth, that they are God's special organization on earth, and that they tell the truth, and that the truth is of absolute ultimate importance, that without truth, then Satan is the father of lies, and they make this big thing about the truth and promoting the truth and being honest, and yet they're not being honest about the Genesis account. And I think it's because we see here that they understand what the implications are. That if they did present an honest accounting of what Genesis said word for word, especially in the fourth creative day, that that their whole doctrinal system falls apart, and that would be a real problem for them and for the Bible students. And this is exactly the reason why I don't believe the Bible students' teachings anymore. They believe in this wonderful salvation for humankind, but again, they are as no more honest about the Bible and about creation as the Watchtower. And in fact, they Russell wasn't being honest about creation. Russell used, when you look at the photodrama of creation, Russell says at the very beginning that some say that the four parts, which each part was 2 hours long, there was it was an 8 hour presentation, that each part was equivalent to 1 year in college, if not more. And so he was promoting uh, the Watchtower. He was promoting the photodrama of creation as being getting the equivalent of a college education, and he was using a hack as the scientific basis. In fact, he called it the photodrama of creation, a religio-scientific presentation of the Bible, and there was nothing scientific about it at all. Isaac Vail was not a credible scientist. Um, um, Charles Piazzi Smythe, unfortunately, he was a scientist. He was the astronomer royal for Scotland, but he went wacko when he went on with the pyramid, and that was all. He lost all his credibility in science when he became a pyramidiot, as Mario Livio calls Charles Piazzi Smythe. Piazzi Smythe lives in the annals of science as an embarrassment, as a crank, and and these were the individuals. They were snake oil salesmen, basically, that Russell clung to and used as their scientific as his scientific basis for the photodrama of creation. And Watchtower hasn't deviated too far from what Russell promotes, especially concerning the fourth creative day. So, anyway, I think it's worth thinking about. I do think that it's something to look at Watchtower, that they're not being honest about this, and it has huge implications. This isn't just being wrong about one teaching. This is taking the entire foundation out from underneath them, completely removing the entire foundation of their entire doctrinal system, their entire doctrinal basis, the ransom, restitution, the millennium, the everything that they teach about salvation, and Jesus offering himself as a sacrifice. This completely undermines every single thing about that doctrinal system. And they understand that. They know it. They know it for a fact. And that's why I think they have a lot at stake here in this omission, when they with this one word, asa. And I think it's not a trivial matter, and I think it's something that if more Jehovah's Witnesses understood and did a little study on their own, they'd come to see the deviousness of Watchtower, that they could not have honestly overlooked and mistaken the meaning of this word in the fourth creative day of Genesis. So that's all I have to say on this. I hope this has been beneficial. I know this has been a long video, uh, and I hope that you were able to last through it. But I think the argument is important, and so I think if you're a Jehovah's Witness that has come across this video, that I've given you something to think about. I hope you think about it honestly, and that you can see that the Watchtower is not being upfront and honest with you about this, and that nothing that they teach is true. They don't have the truth. As you can tell, I'm a little bit passionate about this because this is the very reason to question my faith, to question all the things that I had been raised to believe. So, anyway, this is Truth Seeker. I hope this has been helpful, and I wish everybody the best.